What if everything you've been taught about manhood was incomplete? Or worse, actually holding you back? Today's conversation challenges the armor we built around masculinity and manhood. My guest is Taylor Ellwood, who's walking a path many men sense exist, but only a few have the courage to pursue it. The journey towards what Taylor calls sacred masculinity. In a world where men are consistently reporting deeper levels of loneliness, something is clearly broken in the way how we are approaching manhood. This is Astrid from Unseen Light Podcast, and together with my guest Taylor, we will try to bring a refreshingly honest perspective to path to authentic manhood that requires both vulnerability and strength. Hello, Taylor. Welcome on the show today. I'm so happy to have you here. Can you tell us how did you even got to this topic? This is not a very common topic. So what was your path towards this?
Well, thank you, Astrid, first of all, for having me on the show. Happy to be here. I got into sacred masculinity and really men's work in general in the wake of a breakup. So a few years ago, I got divorced, and I made the mistake that I think many people make, men and women both, but there's certainly a lot of men make, which is that within a couple months, instead of spending a good long time really looking at myself and figuring out my end of things, I got into a rebound relationship. And that rebound relationship was with somebody that was a lot of fun, but there was a lot of cray-cray there. And the thing is that in a large part of it, though, was that for me, I was a codependent, nice guy, wasn't really recognizing how I was trying to avoid a lot of issues that I had. And I'd done a fair amount of inner work over the years, but what I really hadn't done is I hadn't worked with my own relationship around masculinity. And I didn't have a good relationship with my sense of masculinity. I didn't like being a man in a lot of ways. So anyway, I was with this person for about a year, and that relationship ended up breaking me open in a lot of ways. And in the wake of that relationship, I had, she broke up with me in the harshest way possible. And afterwards, like that very night, I'm laying there in bed and I'm just kind of miserable and unhappy. And I'm like, I don't even know who I am. I don't know what it means to be a man in this world. I'm 45 years old. What am I doing with my life? And the next morning, she tried to get back together with me. I'm like, nope, I'm done. I was like, I'm done. And I ended up signing up for a breakup course because I didn't know how to handle being broken up with or divorced or anything. And I realized like I needed some help. And that led me into men's work because I ended up reading a book called Iron John by Robert Bly. And Robert Bly is one of the original people who got it. He basically was part of what's called the mythopoetic movement for men's work. So that was kind of like the first version of healthy men's work. And I read that book, and I ended up reading Magician, King, Warrior, Lover by Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette, which is also another classic book. And as I was reading these books, it kind of started to give me a sense of like a framework. And I realized that really essential problem for me is that I had never had a blueprint for healthy masculinity. I'd grown up with a father who was never really around. He was absent a lot of the time. When he was around, he was abusive. He was an alcoholic. He'd tell me I was a disappointment. He didn't model healthy masculinity. And on top of that, what he did model was like even in his relationship with women wasn't really healthy. So and for me, I had tried to get away from that and go in the opposite direction, but in a lot of ways I ended up in the same place as him, and I think this is something that a lot of men nowadays are dealing with. Hopefully less so as time goes on. So anyway, I got into this work, and from there, over the last few years, I've been steadily exploring men's work and developing my own flavor and version of it as well, that I'm engaged in as a shadow work facilitator, a somatic facilitator, and also a men's coach. And really, for me, this is about healing my relationship both with myself as a man, but it's also healing my relationship with feminine, and then moving on from that toward developing really what I would just call an embodied, healthy version of masculinity that is grounded and shows attentiveness and awareness and presence, because I think that's really what is called for. And what I see with a lot of men is men that are checked out in the world. They're numb, they're in pain, they're addicted to porn, they're codependent nice guys. And here's the most important thing I want to say about this, though, is that all these men, they're not, the central message that they hear a lot of the time is that it's bad for them to be men, that being a man is bad. And what I want to share with it is that being a man is not bad. The models of masculinity that we have been presented has not necessarily been good, and there is a better way. And that's a huge part of what my work's about.
What people nowadays understand, when I said masculinity, they like immediately think about toxic masculinity. And it seems like even like the societal image of masculinity sometimes can be quite close to the toxic side rather than like the healthy side. So what would you say, what's the main differences between like the toxic masculinity that like maybe hurts others or is codependent or just like trying to compensate for something that it's not inside by dependency on thing that's external, how that like is different from the sacred masculinity?
Well, the first thing I would say is that I don't even really like to use the term toxic masculinity, because that is a shame-based term that really essentially says that goes back to that message that men are wrong for being men. And I get where it comes from. I get why like feminists came up with that term. But I think a better term is immature masculinity.
Immature, okay.
Because men that are immature are basically men who have not fully grown up in a lot of ways. And they're not bad for that. They're just not necessarily learning the right models of masculinity. So when I think of toxic masculinity, that ends up shaming men. And I think that automatically causes a knee-jerk reaction for men where it's just kind of like, okay, you're already judging me as bad, so what's the point? And I don't find that very helpful. And that's why I prefer to use immature masculinity instead, which just says like, look, where a man is, he may not be in the most mature place. And so what we want to move toward is mature masculinity or sacred masculinity. And really what I look at is that there is a couple different models of immature masculinity. So there is like the quote unquote alpha bro who's out there lifting weights and on steroids and going around being hyper aggressive and everything else, and kind of being like, everyone is the enemy and I got to compete with everyone and I have to strategize and figure out ways to basically get ahead of everyone else to get what I want. And there's that version, and then there's the version that's like the Marlboro man, like the rugged individual who doesn't let anyone in and keeps everything to himself and shows a stoic face, but really is suffering on the inside and doesn't know how to let people in. And then there's the codependent nice guy. And the codependent nice guy is basically an invisible man. He's somebody who doesn't know how to express what he wants and needs. He's trying to get approval from everyone around him, and he's doing it at the cost of his own respect and at the cost of their respect, because if I'm always trying to get your approval, you're not going to respect me at the end of the day, because it's hard to respect somebody when it's like, oh, I know that you're not being entirely truthful with me about what you want and need. A lot of times the codependent nice guy, man, doesn't even fully know what he wants. So there's that aspect as well. And really what I would say for myself that at one time I was basically a mixture of the codependent nice guy and the Marlboro man, kind of stoic and withdrawn, but also kind of a nice guy, codependent people pleaser trying to get people's approval. I honestly have to say thank you to the person who broke up with me so harshly, because in some ways what she did is she cracked me open to realize that kind of stuff. And I had still some lessons to learn even after that, but it's helped me to get into a much healthier relationship with myself and as a result with other people. So when I look at sacred masculinity, really, and what I would consider embodied masculinity, it's a man who is fully grounded and in touch with himself. He's in touch with his emotions. He's in touch with his needs and wants. He's able to express them clearly and cleanly without putting expectation on the other person that they're automatically going to say yes, but that he's able to take responsibility for himself in the way that he shows up in the world, and that he's able to fully listen and receive and connect with other people around him. And when I say other people, I don't even just mean like being able to connect with his romantic partner. A lot of times, of course, that is an understandable thing that women want a man who's able to connect with them and able to listen and show awareness. I mean, at the heart of it, we all have this very central need of, I want to be seen, I want to be heard. And in the case of women, I want to be understood. And in the case of men, I want to be respected. There's that drive. And so there's that understanding. But I think that really a man who's in touch with healthy masculinity is a man who also has a connection with other men. He's got a healthy sense of brotherhood. He's connecting with those men in a way where they're not competing with each other. Instead, they're supporting each other. They're there for each other. And sometimes what they're doing is they're actually doing a lot of the inner work with each other, so that instead of that man putting all of that emotional work on the romantic relationship and all the pressure on that relationship, he's able to actually show up in that relationship because he's not putting all his emotional eggs in one basket and expecting her to basically handle all of that, which is very unrealistic. And a lot of women experience that, from my observation, with men who have not done this work. And oftentimes those men are doing that because what they've been societally trained toward is, I keep almost everyone out, and the person I do let in is supposed to take care of me. What they don't realize is a lot of times they're actually putting their partner into the mother role. And that is the last place a woman wants to be if she's in a romantic relationship with a man. She does not want to be his mother.
True. I do a lot of tarot readings, predominantly for women. So over the thousands of readings that I've done, I keep meeting the women basically being almost in identical situations over and over and over again. And that is basically, there is some problem in relationship. Maybe the guy doesn't want to be in a relationship or is not sure if he wants commitment, and he shuts down and he refuses to communicate. And then she gets into this mother/therapist role when she's basically trying to help him to open up, help him to do the stuff. And I don't know if it's because maybe the men feels that the women are naturally better with expressing their emotions. Is there a way how to help the woman? Because sometimes the women are okay, what should I help? They ask me, what should I ask him? What should I tell him so he can start expressing himself? What should I do? What they can do?
That's a great question. I mean, one, I would definitely recommend suggesting to them, basically telling that man, look, you need to go and do some inner work. And he needs to be able to do it in an environment where it's not always going to be with his romantic partner. That's putting too much pressure on her. And it's not fair to her, and it's not fair to him either, because honestly, it makes that it makes that relationship at that point less about the relationship and more about trauma bonding and trying to heal. And a lot of times we mistake trauma bonding for a romantic relationship because it feels intimate. Here I am sharing my inner wounds and everything else. Well, really, at the end of the day, I think that it's really important to first be able to acknowledge that sometimes in a romantic relationship, yes, you're going to end up talking about some of those things. Like when I was talking with my beloved recently, I was sharing a couple of things some stuff that came up. But if that's all we ever talk about, that is not a healthy relationship. And it's certainly not the relationship that I would want with her or with any other woman, and yet I can safely say that pretty much most of the relationships I've been in have, to some degree or another, been trauma bonding between both of us. This goes both ways. I want to be very clear about that. And so for men, I think that a lot of times that's where working with a men's coach like myself, and, someone who can do shadow work and can help facilitate them, can help them get into their bodies and get in touch with those things, can be so essential, because that's where that can be unpacked. And I think it actually removes some pressure from the romantic relationship, because let's be honest here. If I come and I'm talking to somebody and I'm saying, hey, here's this really heavy thing that I'm sitting with and working through, I don't know how that's always going to be received. And a lot of times I think one of the reasons men hold back from sharing is because they're afraid that, A, I'm going to be too much. She's not going to be able to handle me. I'm too intense. And as a result, if I share this, I'm going to drive her away. Or I'm afraid of her anger. I think that realistically, most men I know, if not all of them, are afraid of a woman's anger, because a woman's anger, it can be a very fierce thing. And I'm not saying to women, don't be angry. Let me be very clear about that. If you feel anger, you feel anger. You have every right to feel and express and have that anger be heard. I think a lot of times men don't know how to handle that because they don't have the right tools.
I'm pretty sure this can actually quite unhealthily connect with immature feminine, and that is the typical immature feminine, I can fix him type of a relationship. So I would say like it can also go both ways, this type of a situation. And a lot of women love this idea of handsome man, I can fix him type. Like that's a weak spot of many women. So let's say if somebody is in relationship that's like that, like clearly there is some immaturity on both sides. From the men's side, like what to do with that? Like how can they initiate some form of change in the dynamic? Is it even possible once the relationship like got into a certain stage? Just is it possible to change the dynamic even?
It takes a lot of work. It definitely can be possible. I mean, sometimes that's where you go to like a relationship coach or a couples counselor or something like that. I think it's really important to look at the dynamics that are already in place. I look at the relationship. Are the four horsemen of relationship apocalypse present? And what I mean by that, for example, is contempt. Is one or both people feeling contempt toward each other? Are they overly critical? Is one or two of them defensive? Is one or two of them stonewalling? These are the kinds of things that can really damage relationships. And if they're present, I mean, that at that point, that relationship is probably done. And it's really important to recognize that. What it comes down to, I think, is that if we're going to change a relationship, we have to first recognize where is my trauma showing up here? Because usually a fix-it project, and I think this is true for both men and women, is usually based in I'm really trying to fix my relationship with mom and dad. I mean, this is, we've got our mom wounds or dad wounds, and if you have step parents, guess what? You have step parent wounds too. I had a mom and a dad and a stepmom. So I had all three wounds, and those wounds definitely showed up in my relationships. The rebound relationship that I mentioned earlier was a great example of that. I was basically in a relationship with my dad. That person was a heavy drinker, and like that was my dad. And there were other things there. The relationship I got into after that was basically a stepmom, revisiting with my stepmom. And then, I've had relationships. My second marriage was basically me being married to my mom. Now, some of you might be like, ooh, but you know what? This is patterns I see play out. And until we do that inner work to heal those wounds on ourselves, we're going to continue to replicate those wounds in the relationships that we get into, because we're essentially trying to go back to source. We're trying to go back to the parents. And we're trying to mend our relationship with those parents. And that's not going to happen in a romantic relationship, because what you're dealing with is you're basically in a relationship with the projection of your mom, your dad, or step parent. That's the thing that has to be changed. And so that's where going in and doing some of that work can be essential.
I'm pretty sure lots of the listeners just drop their drink as you said it, and then like looking back at their dating history and be like, oh my God, what have I done? Be like, yeah, I'm sure this definitely click for a lot of people as they've been listening. I'm pretty sure. Hey there, taking a quick moment to thank you for joining us on Unseen Light podcast, where we are making the invisible visible, one conversation at a time. If you are enjoying our honest, straightforward approach to spiritual topics, I would love for you to follow us wherever you are getting your podcasts. And for those wanting to go deeper, check the notes for links to our certified online courses designed to help you navigate your spiritual journey with clarity and purpose. And now, back to our conversation. And I would like to say, actually, when it comes to like this inner work with, let's say, your step parents, with the father figure or the mother figure, how would you say that would be different for men who are trying to develop their divine or sacred masculine than, let's say, for women?
Well, first we have to look at the societal expectations put on men versus women, and each both men and women have different societal expectations, and they're dysfunctional in different ways. For men, it's keep your emotions to yourself. Don't cry. Don't share what's really going on. Compete with other boys. Don't express your emotions openly because you'll be considered weak. All that other garbage that's out there.
Don't order salad in the restaurant because salads are for women.
Never had any problem ordering salads, but some men might do that, right? So I mean, that's a kind of a good thing. So to explore right there, like even like right down to your choices. So it's like kind of like, well, why am I choosing to be this way? I spent most of my life distrusting other men. I didn't trust myself as a man. And I think that that was a huge part of it. I don't feel that men can trust other men if they don't first learn how to trust themselves. And a lot of times men don't trust themselves. They've been raised that way. Oftentimes because of the way of the model of the absent father, or the father that was cheating on his wife or doing other things, and or and sometimes it's the mom cheating on the husband. Like, it doesn't really much matter, but the point is that regardless of who did what, there are certain models there, and those models contribute to that experience. Now, fortunately, as men do their work and break those cycles, they have the opportunity to model something different to their children. And hopefully, ideally, what really ultimately occurs is that someday we don't even need this work. I mean, I look forward to that day. I don't know if I'll live to see it in my lifetime, but I definitely hope that someday we don't need to do that as much. And I do think one thing I will say that is encouraging is I am seeing more men who are emotionally aware than maybe like they were a generation ago or 2 generations ago. So I think that's important. But large part of this is like, for men, they need to basically have these experiences. And sometimes the way to have that experience is to go on a rite of initiation. So part of sacred masculinity is really going away from the familiar surroundings. And as an example, I've gone through a few different experiences of my own. I went through the New Warrior Training Adventure through the Mankind Project. I've gone to some Sacred Sons events. I've gone to some events through Uncivilized. These are all different organizations that do men's work. And of course, I'm doing some of these. I actually have staffed at some of these experiences. And there's something really powerful about taking a man out of his normal environment and having him go through an initiatory experience where he comes out the other side cracked open and different. And I mean, those weekend experiences, I think, are an essential integration. And then afterwards, the other part of it is regularly meeting in a circle with other men and continuing to develop that relationship with other men where they can learn, where that man can learn to trust himself and trust other men, and as a result show up differently in the world around him. Because when men are in brotherhood with each other, they aren't approaching life from a place of rugged individualism. Instead, they're approaching from a place of community and awareness and connection. And if I can connect with other men in a healthy and embodied way, then I can also connect with the women around me in a healthy, embodied way. And I think a huge part of this really is that people in general are going to feel safer when a man is in touch and aware and present with himself, because he's created a sense of safety for himself and the way he shows up in the world. He's not going to just lash out and react. And this is something that happens sometimes because this is what we're raised with or taught or told. An essential part of my own work with men is really teaching them how to become a self-expressed, embodied, accountable, responsible man, responsible for the way that I show up, responsible with respecting myself, caring for myself, trusting myself, and trusting the relationships that I'm in, because I'm picking those relationships from a place of values, where I'm identifying the values that are important in my life and I'm living a life of values. So I think that's a huge part of this work and what men need in order to show up in a better way for themselves, and then as a result for the other people in their lives.
I would agree that I think like the situation is getting a bit better. I'm usually seeing it, especially on like the younger generations. They seem to be more in touch with more like healthy, more mature, emotionally mature masculinity sometimes than the older generations. I think again, like most like some cultural societal conditioning. But I would say still I feel that the idea of expressing emotions for men equals being too sensitive, being too feminine. I would say that still it seems to be like one of the things that is still quite persistent. What would you recommend to try somebody like when they would like to start expressing their emotions more, get out of that like the apathy, suppressing state? What should be the first stage like to start learning how to express the emotions better?
Well, first I want to express an appreciation for the point you just made, and share a perspective on that. That for the men listening as well, is that feeling emotions, expressing emotions, is not inherently feminine or masculine. A lot of times what I see out there is this focus on polarity, like, oh, be in your feminine, be in your masculine. What I would say instead is presence instead of polarity. What does it mean to be fully present with ourselves? I feel emotions. Me feeling emotions doesn't make me feminine. Me feeling emotions just means I'm having an emotional experience. And my expression of those emotions in and of themselves doesn't make me feminine or masculine. It's just me expressing my emotions. It's really important to recognize that, the societal notions of masculinity and feminine are just that. They're societal expectations. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't acknowledge them or be aware of them. They're important. And I think sometimes there's so much of an emphasis on, well, if you're expressing your emotions, you're in your feminine. Not necessarily. I've known many men who can be very tender, kind, and compassionate and loving, and that doesn't mean they're in their feminine. That just means they're in their experience of being that. So I think that's a really important thing to recognize.
Yeah, I think it goes the opposite way when basically it's a similar situation just for the female when she's like, okay, I'm masculine. I guess then I should dress masculine, even though I don't like it, or I should act masculine because that's kind of what I guess I should be. If I'm gonna be ambitious, I think that sometimes that's confusing for women as well. It's just like the similar situation when men goes to a restaurant with a woman and the woman orders a steak and the man orders a salad. The server will come and always 9 out of 10 cases, he will put the salad in front of the woman and he will put the steak in front of the man. I would say it can be like death by 1,000 wounds when just like these small things, it kind of compounds, doesn't it?
It definitely does. And this is one of the reasons why I make this point, because even in some of the work that I see out there from people who are doing really good work around this and helping people, I still see a tendency to focus on, to emphasize the polarity aspect. And I want to note, I mean, there is a biological reality, a difference between men and women. Women have a 28-day cycle, maybe a little bit different, but they do, based around the experience of their body going through changes, in regards to, if at least at a certain point up until postmenopause. But before that, they have those experiences, and that cycle plays out in a way that's different than what a man experiences. A man has, his biological cycle is basically consistent day after day after day after day after day. Whereas, when a woman's on her bleed, that's going to be a very different experience than where she's going to be post bleed, or if she's in her luteal phase or something like that. And that's something I want to note too, because I think it's really important for men to be able to track that and be aware of it and show an awareness of kind of like, okay, here's the experience that my partner's going through right now, and have more understanding of that. But at first, all I'd say is that men feel emotions all the time. It's just that they've learned to push them down or not be honest about them. So the first thing is really just what I do is I teach men how to get into the experience of their body. Instead of asking a man, what's he feeling? I'll ask him, what are you experiencing? Where are you experiencing it? Oh, I'm feeling tension in my chest. Okay, well, what's going on in your chest? What's experience? And eventually, at some point, we'll break through to the emotion. I think it's really important to focus on the experience that the man is having, because a lot of times men haven't been taught to initially connect that experience with emotion. And yet the somatic experience is intricately related to the emotional experience. So if I'm feeling some tightness in my chest, or I'm feeling a sense of weight being locked down or something like that, well, what's really going on there? The other day, for example, I was in a class and I stepped forward to be the quote unquote client, and we were doing some early childhood work. And I talked about how I felt this tension, and then I felt like a sharp sense of like nails in my chest. And we explored that and unpacked it, and it ended up being an early memory from my childhood. And it was a really powerful experience. And what helped was initially focusing on that experience. If I had been asked what I was feeling, I would have been like, I don't exactly know what I'm feeling emotionally. I just know that I feel this tension and there's these sharp points. So I think that that's one of the things that I look at in terms of helping men connect to their emotions, is connect to the experience and use the experience as a guide to reach into and access the emotions.
You touched on a great topic, and that is basically the connection of your body and your emotions.
The body can be worked with. Yes. Our body has its own consciousness and awareness. And a lot of times in society, the focus is on the head, especially for men. It's like, oh, be logical, be stoic, be rational. What I find a lot of times is that men actually get stuck in their thoughts, and their thoughts are a reflection of the emotions that they're feeling. So they might be panicking inside and they're having a thought spiral. It's the same thing going over and over again. And that's where I want to get into the body. Well, what's really going on? Let's get away from the thoughts. Let's get into the body. Let's discover what the body has to offer. And we can do that through a couple of different processes. We can do that with shadow work, where we create like ritual facilitation. There's something really powerful, for example, for getting a man into his body and being like recognizing, for example, oh, like I have this experience where I'm feeling like this part of me that's locked in here and I need to push through it. And I have this emotion of anger on top. And that anger is really masking the grief that I need to feel. And so I'm going to push out, and then suddenly I feel that grief and I pop. And now I'm feeling those emotions. So that's a good example of that, where there can be that form of ritual facilitation or guidance. Yeah. You know, really what I find a lot of times is that men need permission to get out of here and back into here. But once they get into their bodies and they learn to connect with their bodies on a regular basis, that's when their bodies can really be a very useful guidance to help men more meaningfully connect and relate to each other and to themselves, and then to other people in general. So I emphasize in my work, a lot of the focus is really on helping men connect with what's going on within themselves. What is actually happening here? And the body is definitely a guide for that, because we're always feeling different sensations and experiences in our bodies.
What would you think is like one of the worst things that men can tell to themselves?
That I have to have it all figured out. Men put a lot of pressure on themselves to have it all figured out. You know, there's the stereotype that men are always thinking of sex. Well, I got to tell you, as a man, I'm not always thinking of sex. It's not the most important thing in my mind. A lot of times what I'm thinking of is, what do I need to do to figure this situation out? Do I have everything sorted out? Do I have all the resources I need? Can I quote unquote provide, or can I take care of these things that need to be taken care of? Men put a lot of pressure on themselves in terms of how they show up in the world, what they're doing to take care of things, what they're doing to quote unquote fix problems, etc. And that is one of the most damaging things, because most of the time we don't always have it figured out. I mean, I think one of the most profound lessons I had, and I've learned this lesson again and again, Astrid, but I keep learning it, was the other day I'm driving home, long drive, and I was realizing like I need to just sometimes be able to let go of the need to be in control, because I'm not in control anyway, and just accept that I don't have all the answers, and that I can be okay with that, and allow myself to be fully present and aware with the fact that no, I'm not always in control, and sometimes I'm just going to have to roll with it and figure it out. But I'm not alone. And that's the other thing. Like, a lot of times men feel alone. You know, they are very lonely, and they might be in a relationship. Like I've been through 2 marriages. I've been in other relationships, and I have felt alone in those relationships a lot of the time, because I have felt kind of like I've had to isolate myself. And so I see this with a lot of other men, and this is one of the things that I help men do is to break through that sense of isolation and loneliness. Men don't have to be lonely, and that at the same time, like, being in a romantic relationship alone is not going to be enough to address that loneliness. First of all, the big part of addressing the loneliness is learning how to address that part of themselves that feels lonely, that lost little boy that wants connection and really needs connection with the rest of that man. But then it's also finding that connection and that healthy embodied relationship with other men, and then with people in general. And that is how I found it. And that's what I teach other men to do as well. When I started developing healthier relationships with other men, it changed the way I related to people in general, but it also changed the way I related to myself. And this is what men need. We need to learn how to change our relationship with ourselves so that we're not telling ourselves that we're alone. You know, we don't have to be alone. And first time I had that realization of I'm not alone, it was the most profound experience, because up until that point, I'd basically spent 45 years thinking I was alone. No, I'm not alone.
I do tons of tarot readings, and all the stuff that you're telling me that you're helping men to develop is the stuff that literally I have hundreds of women complaining like that's the problem that's missing out of relationship. Like, for example, the ability to express. Sometimes the men refusing to, let's say, ask for help, even if it would have be helpful for him the situation to do it, but I guess it was just too much fear to ask for help out of the fear of looking weak sometimes, or just not being used to do it. And I think that also there's sort of misconceptions that women want nice guys. Well, women want a guy who treats them nice, but it depends where is it coming from. If it's coming from emotionally immature space, that's not what women want. That's not genuine nice guy. That one ends up in the friend zone. I can't speak for all the women, but I would say good percentage would tell you that one of the most sexiest thing about a guy is his ability to take responsibility. I would say that one of the most attractive guy who is in control of his emotions in a healthy way, not suppressing them, but not leashing out, not being aggressive, just being kind of in touch with his emotions and being able to take responsibility. I would say that would be the two things that a lot of women would tell you that's like the most sexy things in a guy. Like, these things do overlap. It's just, I guess, it's just not sometimes what society is telling us.
Well, again, I mean, that's because society emphasizes all the things that are the unhealthy aspects of masculinity and prioritizes that. So a man who's all like, super muscular and everything else, and a man who's got it all figured out and yet doesn't take responsibility, all that other silly stuff, but that doesn't really work. What I found is that a man who is responsible for himself and responsible for his actions and willing to take accountability, yes, you're right, that is sexy.
That is really sexy.
It is.
I talk to hundreds of women, guys. That really is like, I know women. I talk to tons of them.
Well,
they're asking me about muscles.
Right. And a huge part of that is because if she feels seen, heard, and understood, if she feels like he is taking the time to fully connect with her and pay attention to her and receive her, she's going to feel safe. She's going to be able to relax. She's going to be able to open up. And if he doesn't do that, it's really hard to feel that attraction. And that makes sense. So there's that aspect. There is the emotional regulation, a man who's in touch with his emotions but doesn't lash out, doesn't push them down, but is able to say, like, I'm having this experience, or I'm feeling this right now. And the other thing, the third thing that I'm going to put there that I think women find sexy, just from my own experience, is men who are able to set and hold boundaries. Nice guys, codependent nice guys, not kind guys. I'm going to differentiate the term. Kind guys are the kind of women that women want, but nice guys, codependent nice guys, have porous boundaries. And what that means is that they aren't able to set boundaries at all. They have no boundaries for themselves. They don't know what their boundaries are, and they don't know what the boundaries of other people are. And they're willing to be walked all over. It's the guy who pays for everything because he hopes he's going to get sex at the end of the night. Instead of just simply saying, hey, I want to go out on a date with you. I'm feeling horny. Are you interested? Okay. At least he's expressing himself cleanly and clearly. She might not be interested, and his ability to take a no gracefully is really important as well. So men, keep that in mind. But there's something really sexy about a man who's confident enough to say what he wants and needs, and at the same time respect the boundaries of other people. Another example of that, I would say, in terms of like the codependent nice guy, is a guy who if a woman is yelling at him or acting in a way that's disrespectful, if he allows it, he's responsible for it. What you allow, you are responsible for. So if she knows that she can break a statue and yell at him and call him names and everything else, and knows that he's not going to do anything because he's afraid of her, she's not going to respect him. She's certainly not going to feel safe with him because she doesn't know when he's going to snap. But also, she's like, I can just walk all over him and get what I want from him. Whereas if he can say, that's disrespectful, I'm not putting up with that behavior, and I'm willing to walk away, that in and of itself is very sexy, because a man who's able to do that and basically say, I can walk away, is huge. And that is one of the rules that I teach men to play by. And it's not to just like abandon the relationship at the first hint of trouble. Let me be very clear about that. but it is to say, like, look, I've got standards. I want to be treated a certain way. You want to be treated a certain way. I want to be treated a certain way too. It's got to be, and
I
that's a
think
real
that,
thing.
yeah, no, that's 100% true. I think that when I think about, let's say, a guy who doesn't have any boundaries, he's a pushover from me, he's going to be pushover from everybody else. So I don't feel safe because I know I will have to become basically a guard dog, if that makes sense, to kind of
Yeah,
guard that person. I would say, again, like, it's a feeling of safety. I would not have feeling of safety with this type of a relationship.
exactly. And it's actually, it kind of illustrates, this is kind of where I'll go over into a little bit of polarity speak, so to speak. This is where a woman, quote unquote, is having to, or be in a mother role, but or in a masculine role. Like, I'm having to set the boundaries. I'm having to make sure that he's safe. Well, wait a minute. What is he doing? Like, I want to know that he can take care of himself and that he can take care of me, that he can show up. We can take care of each other, but that he's going to be able to have a spine. Like, that's absolutely essential. And a man who doesn't have a spine is basically a nice guy. He's going to get walked all over all the time because he's not able to set standards, and she's going to lose respect for him at that point because it feels like, well, you can just get walked all over at any time. And I think for men, that one of the most interesting experiences is that when a man learns how to start setting boundaries, that is actually one of the most courageous acts that he can do, because what is he doing? He's saying, I'm actually worth something. I deserve respect and self-care, and I can trust myself enough to speak up. And that's something that a lot of men find intimidating because they've been taught that in some ways that, oh, like, speaking up for yourself, asserting yourself is not always necessarily considered good. Well, it is actually good under healthy circumstances. Being able to say, this behavior is not acceptable, I'm not going to be treated that way, is actually one of the most affirming activities that you can do, because it says, I care about myself enough to say I'm worth this and I deserve this. I deserve to be treated in a good way. And if I'm treating myself that way, then I can also and will also treat you in that way.
If you respect yourself and if you have good relationship with yourself, you will naturally respect others. That's a really, really deep truth. If you could sum up the men's journey in one sentence, how would you sum it up?
The journey to becoming a man is really about leaving behind the immaturity of the patterns that aren't working, the immature masculine patterns, and stepping fully into what it means to be a man on your own terms, but in a way that allows you to connect with other men in brotherhood and allows you to connect with women in sacred partnership and relationship.
I really love how you put it. Please tell us if you obviously have a Substack, you wrote a book, you do coaching. So can you please let us know where our listeners can find you? Obviously, I'm going to put all the links to Taylor's stuff in the description section below, but tell us where we can find you.
Sure. My Substack is mensmysteries.substack.com. And you can find me writing there, interviewing other people, and just kind of sharing men's work in general. I have a book called The Quest for Mature Masculinity, which is available on different websites, Amazon, Kobo, Draft to Digital, all those other good places, and is also available as an audiobook. And I'm working on a second book, which is called Unbroken Man, which is a book about how to heal from the pain of a breakup and divorce and use it to basically remake yourself as a healthy embodied man. So that's the second book that I'm working on. And then if you're interested in working with me, either taking one of my classes or doing a facilitation experience with me, you can find me at www.inneralchemycoach.com. And that's where I also have a couple of free ebooks and resources that are available if you want to learn a little bit more about what I do and how we can work together.
Amazing. That was amazing. Thank you so much for coming today on the show. It was a pleasure. This is a great topic. I think it's not nearly talked enough about, and I'm hoping maybe this show will change it. Maybe we'll start some form of a conversation about this topic. I hope he will. And thank you so much. So, my dear listeners, it was another episode of Unseen Light Podcast. Let your inner light shine. I'm going to be looking forward in the next show.